We've got a great presentation coming up for you. Thank you all so much for coming. Today, we are going to be covering even more of the HMIS data standards updates from HUD. We want to thank you for your time and attention. Today, presenting, we'll introduce our presenters here in just a second. You can probably see them already, Jesus and Jessica. Give everyone a wave if you would. Great. So just a couple of housekeeping items. If you want to participate in the conversation and ask any questions, we encourage you to use the chat function. If you have any connectivity issues or issues with the webinar right now, we will be distributing the recording and the slides so you can still get all the information. And also, if you have any questions about that, you can contact your client success manager directly. So this is going to be our agenda of today's webinar. We'll introduce our presenters here in a second, and then we'll also go over the timeline of how ClientTrack and Client Insight will be updated with the new data standards. And then the rest of the presentation will be geared toward the more technical aspects of how coordinated entry will be affected. Next slide, please, Jessica. Great. So I just wanted to introduce our presenters. Jessica Fleming is a product analyst here at Eccovia, and she leads the development of HMIS solutions within ClientTrack and assists in implementing more streamlined HMIS processes. She helps improve case management and better coordinate care at the community levels. With a BA degree from Duquesne University, Jessica enjoys working at Eccovia because of the widespread impact of streamlining HMIS processes for continuum of care programs across the country. She's worked closely with HMIS for more than 7 years in various roles. Our next presenter is Jesus de Leon Serratos. He is an HMIS administrator here at Eccovia, where he assists communities with reporting, compliance, training, and data analysis. He's worked in a lot of different industries in the nonprofit world and elsewhere, but he has a lot of extensive experience in helping people who help others. So before joining Eccovia, he was actually an HMIS project manager and coordinator for the Texas Homeless Network for 6 years. Next slide, please. Jessica and Jesus, I believe it is now your time. I will take myself off the video feed temporarily to save on bandwidth, but take it away.
Thanks, Bryce. So we're going to start off today just kind of recapping the data standard update timeline. We did share this in the original first webinar as well, but we did add one more item. You will notice now there is a DSU office hours spanning from August to the end of September. That timeline might adjust slightly. It might start a little bit early and kind of go through the end of September, but we will be holding community data standard update office hours. It will be through the community of practice in Teams. And so if you are not already a part of that, there is a slide at the very end to just let you know how to actually do that, but we will schedule those from there. Also, as of now, you'll see on the timeline that we are at the DSU CE activity webinar. But at the same time, if you look at the top of the timeline, there's the development of updates. So development has begun on the form updates and workflow updates for the items that have already been identified and kind of outlined. So we will be able to demonstrate most of those within the DSU office hours, gather feedback, and make sure that you can all see what's happening ahead of time, because we do understand, and we did hear at the last webinar, that 1 month turnaround time is really tight. So we want to make sure that you're getting as much information as possible. So that is the one addition for our timeline. And the goal here is still the training environments will still receive those DSU updates as of September 1st. And then all of the production environments will receive the DSU updates as of October 1st. So I quickly just want to run through the specific elements of coordinated entry. HUD does not always define many things for us, but they have defined the specific elements that make up a coordinated entry system. And so we're looking at the access points, the assessments, prioritization, and referral. And so we really wanted to ensure that as we were developing and working through how to actually implement the coordinated entry changes that HUD has released, that we are making sure that everything is as streamlined as possible, and also that we understand how you are operating your coordinated entry systems. So a few weeks ago, HMIS customers should have received the coordinated entry system survey from their client success manager. The survey was intended to gather information about how each of your communities have your coordinated entry system set up, so that we can take all of that information and use that in the development and make sure that we're meeting the needs for as many communities as possible with our updates. So I'm going to run through here just a couple of the results from that survey, just to provide context for the different items that we're having to keep in mind as we're developing. So first up is just how many environments. So we got 25 responses, 23 of them were usable. The other 2 had just basically said that they weren't familiar with the coordinated entry system. But we wanted to kind of outline that this is, it's a pretty big difference if you have a multi-COC implementation versus a single COC implementation. And so this is one of the very first items that we wanted to highlight here, is that the majority of folks who are using ClientTrack are single COC implementation, but 22% are multi-COC implementation. And that just adds an additional layer of complexity whenever we're developing things, because we need to make sure that multiple different COCs, there might be multiple different planning committees and everything else. So making sure that all of that is taken into account during development. Next up is access. So each of these access models has implications to how your system might be configured. For example, no wrong door approach might handle a coordinated entry project in ClientTrack pretty differently than a single point of access coordinated entry system would. And so we want to just be sure that in taking consideration of that we're kind of making sure that as the workflows are being designed, the activity is being designed, that it is actually going to be as usable as possible and as easy as possible. So we don't want to make it overly complex. And so having this information here is incredibly helpful. One thing that we definitely learned from doing this survey that I don't think I necessarily fully thought through previously is the combination of coordinated entry access types. So that was really helpful to be able to see. A lot of these had, whether or not it was a multi-COC implementation, so they might have had more than one different access type, or even a balance of state that had multiple different access types because the population is so large. And the COC covers so many different areas. So that information was incredibly helpful for us to be able to understand, especially in planning the CE activity. Next up is assessment. So I think everybody knows that as at baseline right now, most of the assessment information is related into the VI SPDAT. But as we're developing 4.21 or coordinated entry activity, more communities are moving towards custom assessments, other prioritization methods. And so we want to be able to be sure that our coordinated entry process is accounting and accommodating for that. So having this information was just really important to be able to understand how you're doing the vulnerability assessments. And also, one of the biggest takeaways from this information that we wound up getting was how high the number of multiple avenues for assessment was pretty common. And definitely the most common answer, even though it was never an answer on its own, was case conferencing. And so that was always in combination in some way, shape, or form. And I know that might look different across many different communities, but that was definitely illuminating whenever considering how coordinated entry is actually set up in your communities. This next one is just about the subpopulations that are used in determining prioritization of households. So this might not directly help with 4.21, and coordinated entry activity, but it does really help to shed a light on the priorities across different communities. And as a later venture, not necessarily during data standard updates, this information could definitely be used maybe in looking at by name list updates or things like that. So this was really helpful for us as well. And finally, the last element of coordinated entry that we had specifically asked about was regarding referrals and bed management. So this question really helped us to pinpoint just how diverse the coordinated entry systems that are using ClientTrack are actually set up. This also definitely sheds a light on how 4.20, which is going away, but it's currently the coordinated entry events, how that's actually being used and implemented in each of your systems. And that referral and bed management really led us to understanding actually how customized each of your coordinated entry solutions might be. This was a scale of 7 stars, and the average across all of the 23 communities that answered was a 4.3. And basically what this was telling us is that there is definitely room for simplifying the process overall. And so while HUD, this is a fairly large update for HUD for the 4.21, I think it gives us a really good opportunity to kind of rethink how everything was integrated and making sure that, we're evolving as HUD is changing and evolving. So I am going to wrap this up and kind of hand this over to Jesus, but I definitely just want to thank everybody for being here, and let's jump into some of the new elements.
Yes, thank you, Jessica. And I wanted to check actually before with Bryce. Yes, hi, Bryce.
Yes, thank you, Jesus. Just before we dive into the particularities, I just wanted to remind everyone who's new to the webinar today, or just coming in, or just as a reminder, please use the chat if you have any questions. If you're unable to access the chat, go ahead and save your questions for your client success manager, and we'll get those squared away for you. But anyway, just to let you know, the chat is available if you click on the nav bar above in your version of Teams, or if you're in the browser version. So thank you.
Sweet. Well, thank you, Bryce. Thank you, Jessica. And hi, everybody. If it wasn't already obvious, and based on the survey data that Jessica just presented, or in case you just joined in, coordinated entry is a unique beast. And I mean that in the best possible way, like a beautiful unicorn, I guess, different colors and all. The characteristics of each community are somewhat reflected in the design of every CE implementation, while COCs have the flexibility to approach it via single entry point, no wrong door access, or even multi-site centralized, a combination. Bottom line is CE is not structured the same way as any other traditional projects within HMIS, which means that the setup of HMIS projects and the requirements for collecting CE data can differ significantly depending on the COC. For those of you who have been involved with COC, this is nothing new, right? This is like the great time to check. I mean, I am not muted. Great, sweet. Next slide, Jessica, please. So yes, regardless of the exceptionalism behind your coordinated entry approach, there are a few data elements that HUD requires for measuring purposes. And while it would be great if I read you the full 2024 HMIS set of standards here, live on video, I doubt that we budget the time, and I would much rather explain that in a video, but we don't have time for that either. So instead, we're going to start right here with this element 2.9. This is a new element, CE participation status. And by the way, this is a good time also to remind everybody to make sure that you watch at least the last 3 HMIS lead and system administrator webinars. HUD has been providing updates and guidance on this and other new elements that every HMIS admin must be aware of. They have a much deeper dive on the content, I mean, we're telling you how we are implementing those elements here in our solution, but if you want to know more about why they're making these changes, the complexities behind the data, and if these changes are beneficial, the HMIS lead system administrator webinars at the HUD Exchange should be your first pit stop. Let's start here with 2.9, coordinated entry participation status. This is a new element, as I mentioned earlier. You will be able to find in your project setup form. HUD's challenge from the get-go was identifying which projects participate in your coordinated entry system. The CEAPR made this determination easier because without a clear definition or instructions of which projects should be counted, well, I mean, it's a challenge, especially when your CE entry point could be unique. Because I mean, yeah, your CE entry point could be a unique CE project, call it like project type, type 14, or an emergency shelter type 0 or 1, or a street outreach type 4, or like Jessica mentioned earlier, like it could be a combination. So you see the challenge. So this element right here is a direct response to that. After October 1st, your project or projects, depending on your community, however your community does CE, must be first and foremost designated as an access point. The data standard manual says this like this. The visibility of the fields in this element are intended to be limited to only the applicable service types identified in 209. Is the dependent aid provided by CE Access Point project. So this means that if an if an access point only conducts homelessness prevention and crisis housing / shelter related activities, the only visible fields for that project should be prevention and shelter screening. Other fields are not applicable and should not be visible or used by the project. We're still in this slide over here. Yes. Let's say you have one CE access point. Once the element is available, admins will have to go to the project setup form and select all applicable activities that said project provides, as this designation will work in tandem with the other new addition to the HMIS data standards, which is in the next slide now. Yeah, the element of the hour, 421, coordinated entry activity.
Before we get to that, Jesus, we have
Yep.
one quick question. I believe
Sweet.
you might have already addressed this, but Yoav says, can a project be both a coordinated entry access point and a project that receives referrals? I think you said yes, but I can't remember.
Yes.
Okay.
Short answer, yes. Jessica, you have anything else to add there?
Nope, just yes. And a perfect example of that is an emergency shelter. You can receive the referrals, but you can also be an access point as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sweet. Okay, yes. The 4 CE activity types, as HUD introduced them in this latest edition of the HMIS Bible, are prevention, shelter, housing, and or direct service. Each activity comes equipped with its own dependent logic. And let's dwell here for a minute. So a CE activity record must be created each time a client receives a screening, a check-in, an assessment, a referral, or a direct service. And each activity should be based off any of these 4 types. I keep doing this as if I was in a TikTok, but I mean, like, you guys can see this slide. Homelessness prevention, crisis housing / emergency shelter, housing, and or direct services. And according to the manual, when an HMIS end user selects yes for any of these service types, additional response options become available to record the outcome of this specific interaction. For example, the outcome could indicate that the client was placed on a prioritization list or receive a referral to an available project. One thing that is important to remember, for each service type, there must be one and only one outcome. In the example that they use in the manual, it states that if a housing assessment is completed, there may never be multiple housing referrals within the single CE activity record. If multiple housing referrals are made for a client, they must be recorded in separate CE activity records. This is why I will insist again, go and get the manual and read that. Because if something is not clear, as Jessica indicated, there's going to be time, right? We're going to be talking about this even after this webinar is over. So it'll be a good idea to cut up on stuff that, especially like this one. Now, while this, it is possible for your access point to conduct different types of CE activities, the outcome rule remains the same, only one outcome per record. And I want to pause here for a moment in case we have questions. If we had a poll, I will be asking how many have read the data standard manuals already, but we don't. Bryce, do we have questions?
It doesn't look. Oh, Brittany asks, what is the location referring to?
What is the what? Sorry.
What is the location referring to? Can you clarify what you mean by that, Brittany?
Oh, I think it's in here in housing screening where it says location of housing referral, maybe.
Oh,
or
yes.
well, there's another one in most of them have. Do you want? Well, actually that's also in the manual. I was not intended to read more from the manual, but if that's what we want, we can go there. Yeah, and I don't know which one you were asking, but the manual will tell you, like, for each of those. For instance, we're looking at referral of prevention, location of prevention referral, list of possible projects accepting CE referrals. So that's pretty much will be similar to the others, like location of shelter, list of possible projects accepting CE referrals, pretty much. Does that answer the question?
Can I add on to that, Jesus?
Absolutely.
So this is one of the other fields for coordinated entry activity that will be impacted by that coordinated entry participation status. So if you're looking at, let's say, shelter screening assessment and referral, if you're looking at the location of shelter referral for that, the only, HUD basically wants to capture the project that referral was made to. And so the only list, or the only projects you will see in that list will be shelters that are checked as receiving coordinated entry referrals and that have an active coordinated entry participation status. So that's to say that if the coordinated entry participation status is end dated before the day that you're doing that coordinated entry activity, that project would not show up in that list. And so this means that project setup for 2.09 coordinated entry participation status will be really, really important to how your coordinated entry flow is going to work. So that's one thing that we'll definitely need to kind of pay attention to. And this is, I kind of see this question popping up in the chat. Is the location of referral referring to the resulting enrollment? Not necessarily. So that does not necessarily have to result in an enrollment. It can, but it doesn't have to. It's strictly that if I am shelter A and I'm a coordinated entry access point and I'm making a referral to shelter B is what the location of shelter referral would be. So hopefully that is a little bit clear, but I will be able to show it a little bit later on in the, we're going to do a demo of coordinated entry activity that might help clear some of this stuff up.
Thank you.
Sweet. Thank you. Anything else in here? No?
I don't think we have any other questions.
Sweet. I think we can go to the next slide. Oh, you got, yeah.
Oh, we have one more question from Carrie. Will there be an import or multi-edit option to update the project setup, or will we need to click into each project one at a time on October 1?
Yeah, I think that's
a great question. that we don't have an answer to, but is definitely a suggestion that we'll put in for the development that we're working through for this.
Thank you.
Sweet. Yep. What's retiring? Yay. I don't have anything for this slide. We can go to the next one because this is a good segue for this. Oh, remember this? I feel like they were part of our lives for a brief moment. I don't know, maybe you'll miss them, or maybe you never saw them either. Let's begin here. Can we go to the next slide? Because I want to start with 419, coordinated entry assessment. So 6 elements. Some of them were only part of the CSV. Are going away. So yeah, bye guys. There's still stuff in here, as you notice on this slide, that we're keeping. Well, not we, I mean, like HUD decided to keep those. Let's go to slide number like 20, I guess is the next one. Yep. So this is 420 coordinated entry event. Of this one, 8 elements are going up in smoke. However, if you notice, not everything is going away. And with the ashes of these 2 elements, HUD created 421. And since some of the data from the surviving elements remain relevant for your CE project, they send the instructions to map the data from these elements where possible to 4.21 CE activity. And that is exactly what Jessica will tackle in the upcoming slides. But first, again, let's go back and check with Bryce, see if there's any questions.
I don't believe there are. I think we can soldier on for the time being. Just as a reminder,
Sweet.
everyone, use the chat function if you have any questions that you'd like us to address today.
Awesome. Well, Jessica, take it.
Alrighty. This one is going to be a little bit of a bear with me situation. I think mapping anything is challenging. Mapping coordinated entry assessment and coordinated entry event into a brand new element is painful. And so we have been trying to figure out the easiest way to present this data to you. The mapping document that HUD released is available on the HUD Exchange if you dare to look at that. Please feel free. I am not discouraging that by any means, but we tried to simplify it for these slides. So we're going to get started. All of the columns on the left are 4.19 and 4.20, so all of our existing elements that are remaining and not retiring. And then on the right-hand side is 4.21 elements. So we've just tried to very simply draw arrows. This will continue to build on itself as we move through the next couple of slides. But basically what we are doing and what HUD is doing in particular is just combining everything. So you will have a coordinated entry activity for any assessment or event, depending on the different types of answers that were given at that point in time. So one of the very first things that will be mapped is the date of activity. So that could be informed by the date of assessment or the date of event. So you will see this once it actually goes live, but this is this one's fairly easy. Next up is contact type. So this is the contact type is the new coordinated entry activity element. It is mapping pretty much one-to-one from assessment type. So you still have the exact same drop-down values that you had previously, which are phone, virtual, and in-person. So that will just map one-to-one. It's just a renamed element. Then you have the assessment level. So previously, for currently in coordinated entry, we have housing needs and crisis needs. HUD has now split that up into 3 instead of 2. So you have prevention, shelter, which is they're also still considering crisis, or housing. And that could be anything with a screening, an assessment, or referral. Then we have the event, which is what the outcome will be. So all of the events that was quite a list that existed in the existing coordinated entry element is now going to be broken up based on the assessment level. So a referral to a prevention project will only appear as an outcome under the prevention screening assessment referral. I'll be able to demonstrate this whenever we do kind of a demo of what the mock coordinated entry activity could look like, and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. But next up is the location of crisis housing or permanent housing referral. That's mapping over to location of referral. So depending on what type of event was selected in your current coordinated entry event, trying to count how many times I can use the word event or coordinated entry in one sentence. Depending on which of your event outcomes you have selected currently, it will then map over to that specific project that the location of the referral was sent to. Then you've got your referral result. So your referral result is going to stay the same. It maps 1-to-1. So you still have the client accepted, client rejected. You still have those same 3 options. And date of result will map over to the result date. Again, they just renamed it slightly. And then in addition to the prevention, shelter, or housing screening assessment or referral, you've also got direct service or diversion provided. So we kept that a little bit separate because it doesn't have the same dependent logic as Jesus had shown on a couple slides back. But it is an additional assessment level. So now instead of 2 assessment levels, we're moving to 4 assessment levels. So all of our assessment levels will now be prevention, shelter, housing, or direct service or diversion. And again, I'm hoping that this will make much more sense once I'm able to actually demo what this could potentially look like. And finally, there is going to be a specific outcome that is related directly to direct service or diversion provided. So before I move into the coordinated entry activity, I want to see if there is any specific questions related to the mapping that I just showed, and I can stay on this screen here if that's helpful. Or if you want to hold those until I'm kind of demoing what the coordinated entry activity could look like. Bryce, are there any questions currently?
I'm not seeing any.
Okay. I do love that meme, and that is exactly how I felt trying to create those slides. So
Yeah, I'll bet.
Mad scientist a little bit, yeah.
Yep.
All righty. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment, and then I'm going to reshare my screen just so that we can show the element itself. Alrighty. So this is a proof of concept. So I just want everybody to be aware that this is not the final. I made this, the developers did not. So if it is ugly, that is my fault, nobody else's. But this is also kind of a recreation. This is kind of a recreation of the interactive coordinated entry tool that was shared on the HUD Exchange, and that at our most recent HMIS lead call with HUD, I think Meredith Alspa shared what that could potentially look like. I have a hard time with macros in Excel, so I wanted to recreate it as a form in ClientTrack and kind of show everybody what this looks like. So the very first thing that you'll see is the new element for date of activity. So that is, of course, just going to default to whatever date you're doing it on, but you can change that if you need. You've got your contact type, so phone, virtual, or in person. So today I'm just going to choose phone. You've got an enrollment here, so coordinated entry activity will have to be tied to an enrollment specifically. So any applicable active enrollment, because coordinated entry activity can only occur within, oh, you can't see my drop-down lists.
Yeah, we only see the
That is because I'm only sharing my, hang on one second. Let me redo that. Can you see them now?
Yep.
Perfect. So contact type again, phone, virtual, or in person. I'll keep that as phone. And then you've got your enrollment. So the coordinated entry activity has to occur within the enrollment period. So it can happen on the day of enrollment and the day of exit, but it cannot happen before or after those enrollment dates, if that makes sense. So if my date of activity is 6/13, but my client does not get enrolled until 6/14, this will not show up. That is specified in the data dictionary and the data manual. And HUD has clarified that a couple times with the vendors on vendor calls. So just something to keep in mind. So for this enrollment, it is looking at an enrollment that I created yesterday for COC coordinated entry. So I'll select that. And then my project for coordinated entry is set up to provide prevention, shelter, housing, and direct service or diversion services. If I was only set up for coordinated entry participation status, to only show prevention or shelter, these other two checkboxes here would not appear. So that's kind of referring back to what Jesus had presented with coordinated entry participation. If I were providing a shelter screening to the client who I have in front of me, I would select shelter, and then that will pop up the dependent logic for that specific question. So the shelter screening assessment and referral is yes. So there's only two options, yes or no. And then we have our shelter outcome here. So our shelter outcome will be a referral to diversion project, client declined, referral to emergency shelter, safe haven, or bed opening. I'm going to select that one just to show you what the dependent questions are after that. So because I've now made a referral, and HUD defines referrals as specifically having a bed opening available at that point in time. So I am referring my client to go stay in this shelter this evening, and they have confirmed that they have a bed opening. Then it's going to ask me for the location of the diversion referral. So I would select COC emergency shelter. And then it's going to ask me for my referral result. So successful, unsuccessful, unsuccessful. You'll notice that this shelter referral result is not mandatory because, of course, you might not know that at that point in time. So this is pretty much exactly the way that coordinated entry, I think, events are currently operating. For our sake today, I'm just going to select that it was a successful referral, and then the referral result date then becomes mandatory. So I will select that today was the day for that.
We have a question from Lynn,
Yep.
who asks, this might be way too early to know, but how will this be integrated for users to access? For example, will it be in a separate workflow, or will it be in a workflow or a separate form for users to add data into?
Yeah, that's a great question and something that we've been trying to figure out because I know personally, if something's not directly in front of me, I don't remember to fill it out. And so we want to make sure that it's available within the workflow, but we also want to make sure that it's available to come back and update the referral result date, and or do outside of the workflow if you don't like to do it in workflow. So the idea is that we will be able to do it in more than one place. And because now all of the coordinated entry elements will now be on one form, it will be significantly easier to link to, depending on if you're coming from an assessment, a referral, or a service. So those are the three places that we are looking to integrate this form, or whatever this form becomes for whenever it's released, to hopefully be able to have that, we can link to it in multiple different ways and just make it as easy as possible.
Follow-up question to that. Daniel asks, or the other way around, will we be able to incorporate coordinated entry activity fields into custom service, referral, and assessment forms that we already use?
Yeah, so I think that's those are the pieces. We want to make sure that this coordinated entry activity, it's not necessarily going to be the first form that you would navigate to, if that makes sense. Because there's so many different ways that you can access or complete a coordinated entry activity. So if we had a coordinated entry activity that was only for services, we would have to, or only for referrals, or only for assessments, we would have to have 3 separate forms to maintain. And that can get incredibly complicated, especially if you were customizing anything. So what I think the intention would be is to make this as simple, this form itself, as simple as possible. And then if you have custom service, custom referral, custom assessments, that it can easily be inserted as a sub-render or a clickable form or something like that, where you can kind of navigate to it very easily.
Len asked, can it be part of the service entry screen as well?
That is another place that we're considering. Yeah.
Okay.
So
I thought you'd already said
services,
something about that, but
yeah, services, referrals, and assessments. Those three, I think, are the biggest things that we have to consider how this coordinated entry activity actually integrates into.
and then Zach asks, if you were to click multiple options, for example, prevention plus shelter, would that get stored as two separate 4.12 assessments?
So it actually would get stored as one assessment. So HUD has been very clear that you can have more than one. I want to make sure I get the word right so that I'm not confusing. You can have more than one assessment level at a time. So you can do shelter and housing at the same time. It will appear both on the form here, and you can fill this out just exactly as you would, and have all of the dependent questions pop up. So this would only be one. However, when you get into having to record two different ones, is if I were to have made a referral to an emergency shelter, safe haven, or bed opening, and I placed them on a prioritization list. If I did both of those things in the exact same coordinated entry activity, that would have to be two different coordinated entry activity records.
Thank you.
But if it's based on the shelter, if it's based on the assessment levels, different assessment levels can be done at one time.
I don't think we have any other questions. Oh, Abby asks, I'm really confused by the referral to diversion project opening being initiated from shelter screening versus housing screening. Since there aren't dependent questions if I track it from shelter first, I don't track the outcomes in the same way, question mark, but if I add it from housing screening, I have dependent fields.
If you add it from, that's a great question that I don't know the answer to right this second. From housing outcome, you are right that it does become a diversion project opening. And I actually do have a question written down to ask at the vendor call on this Thursday. There isn't a diversion project type that exists currently. And so if we followed the same logic that we needed for rapid rehousing, PSH, things like that, then we wouldn't have a list to be able to populate for the actual location that this was made to. So I definitely agree with that. And that is something that I have currently written up as a question. That might have been an error, as you mentioned, with the data standards, that it actually should not have included that in the specific dependencies, but I'm not sure the answer to that one, but that's definitely something that we'll have to ask.
Jeremy asks, for multiple COC implementations, are you planning on considering the COC code for the projects, quote, making, quote, referrals when matching them to projects with the same COC code to receive the referrals? This can be a possible issue to avoid one coordinated entry process referring to another COC's projects.
Yeah, so that actually came up on a call that we were having with HUD TA in particular, and we said, how does this actually impact multi-COC implementations? And currently, as the data standards are written, 2.09 coordinated entry participation status does not take into consideration COC code at all. So that is an additional factor that we've asked to be included during the development so that you can link a specific COC to that coordinated entry participation status, whatever it might be, whether it's an access point or a referral. And it would also be a multi-select. So Lynn, I see that, you do cross-refer clients on occasion to different COCs. You could at that point select more than one COC that coordinated entry participation status applies to. So we are trying to think through that, but the data standards don't necessarily take that into account at this point. When we did bring it up with HUD TA, they did say that the intention was there to be able to differentiate it based on COC, but that didn't necessarily make it very clear in the data standards. So they might be looking to update that, but we're not sure. We won't see it until it's released.
Okay, last call for questions. Does anyone else have any questions right now? Should we go back to the slides for everyone else to wrap up, or does anyone else have any questions for Jessica and Jesus? Okay.
So this is the same slide that you all saw during the first webinar. So just how can you prepare for the DSU now? We know that that's a big question. We know that 1 month turnaround time is rough. And we have tried to figure out different ways to be able to let you all know what's happening beforehand. But that's also part of the reason that Jesus is helping co-host here, is that Jesus is one of the people that will have to make those changes within the month time frame, just like all of you. And so we wanted to make sure that you were talking to somebody who is actually having to deal with the same things as you, and can help give any type of advice or anything like that. So I'm going to hand that over to Jesus.
Sweet, thank you, Jessica. I think yes, sweet. And I feel like I'm preaching here to the choir. I know that there's some new people, but also I know we have some seasoned HMIS admins over here that already have a system that have already shared some ideas. Because yes, it might be rough if your implementation or if you're using a CE baseline. Then you can cruise, I guess. You can relax. I mean, and like wait until like almost maybe a week before October and go and make the changes that HUD requires. But if you have a custom CE, well, then there's other things that you have to be doing, right? And there's not enough time. So things that you can be doing right now, obviously, and I'm going to be talking here about stuff that I am doing or that I have done in the past. But this is another a good opportunity to make that plug for that channel that we have in Teams, the communities of HMIS community of practice, because that'll be a good way to share ideas, what everybody's doing. Hey, I feel like if we share information, it becomes a little less daunting. In my case, what I have been doing, and I'm going to share my screen over here. It's basically like there's the documents that we have explained before, the dictionary. It indicates what changes are going to be happening. And what I did is I created this form where I'm starting to put, all right, well, I have all my additions, and then I have stuff that needs to be removed for a specific form. Again, it's just to keep me occupied and also like to understand where these changes are gonna come. Eccovia usually what does is they release a document that we call the impact report that details which forms are gonna be impacted in your solution. So you can pay attention to those specific forms. I mean, because sometimes when you start thinking about customizations, you're like, oh my God, I have like 400 different forms in my solution. You're not gonna have to update 470 forms, right? I mean, there's gonna be just a few that are gonna be impacted. But having in here all of the elements that are gonna be impacted, and what I did in here is I have like the root forms that ClientTrack are gonna be modifying. And then what I did over here, if I scroll a little more, I have all the work groups from one of my implementations. And then I had to put all of the different form customizations that we have. So I can see, all right, well, if this element is going to be impacting this baseline form, I know I have to come in here and work on this forms over here. And this, again, is a way to keep me on track so I don't miss any of the forms. And, you know, to have an idea of where to start. This kept me occupied and a little less anxious about the whole process. Now, since that document is going to be released later, and you're like, well, but I would like to start right now. How can I do this? Well, I mean, if you have your access to ClientTrack, you can go into ClientTrack, and I think I have it over here open. Yeah. If you go into your work groups, for instance, you can have a list of the forms that are going to be impacted. You choose one of your work groups, you go to form customizations, and then on the one side, you have all of the baseline forms, and then on the other, you have your overrides. So if, let's say, client intake is going to be updated. All right, well, then, you know, you're going to have to work for this particular work group on this form. And that, again, like what I did is I exported all of these, and then I started mapping like, okay, well, this form goes here. You know, it's fun. It can get entertaining after a while. The document I'm using, and everybody has to should have access to them, are in the HUD exchange. This one, for instance, is the HMIS data collection requirements for transition to the data standards. And this document details what is going to be impacted and like what admins like us will have to go and do in your specific community. In some cases, you will have to go and do some back data entry. In some others, you will not. But those are the type of things that, at least to me, I mean, keep me stay on task. And to plan, because again, I mean, this is going to be a very intense month, but at least if you're starting now, you're getting a little ahead of the process, and well, September will not be as long. But again, I know that this is just one idea of many. With all our seasoned veterans that we're talking with, I'm sure that there's other ideas, and it'll be great to know them, because again, I mean, I feel like sharing information will make everybody more aware, and you know, it'll help alleviate some of the anxiety that comes with data standards for everybody. That's all I have right now, but if there's any other comments, any other questions, we're still here. If not,
Yes.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesus. We have a couple of questions. Jason asks, are you considering building an option for 4.21 in ClientTrack that allows for anonymous coordinated entry intake assessment and referral for survivors of violence and human trafficking?
That is on the list of things that we are looking at and considering. There has actually been a concern that was raised with 2.09 coordinated entry participation status. If you have a domestic violence project that's entered for HIC purposes, and they are marked as yes to receiving coordinated entry referrals, they will show up based on how the data standards are currently written as a potential project that you can refer them to. And that's a big no-no for any domestic violence project at all. So we did raise that to HUD TA specifically. And so we are looking and trying to figure out how to integrate any anonymous clients or anything like that, so that domestic violence projects can also be represented within coordinated entry.
Zach asks, you said that recording 2 interventions in the same category would require 2 separate submissions of the form. Has HUD TA indicated whether it'd be allowable to have multi-select for the dependent options, or have they explicitly expected a one-to-one relationship between the intervention category dependent field and intervention parentheses dependent field responses?
They have specifically noted a one-to-one relationship between the dependent intervention category. So whether it's referral or a shelter screening assessment, there's only one outcome to be allowed per shelter or per housing screening assessment. So while you can do more than one different type of intervention or assessment, you can only have one outcome per. And they've been very explicit about that. We did ask if there's a multi-select option that was available, and they said no.
Gotcha. Lynn asks, Jesus, could you share a version of the spreadsheet without your overrides or work groups identified?
I think I can. It's just not over yet. I haven't finished it because I still have to put all of the forms. But yeah, I think that we can. Once it's over, or once I finish with this, I was going to share it with here internally, but if it serves anyone, I think, yeah, I think we can do that.
That might be coming, not with this recording necessarily, but it could, but we could share that in one of the subsequent webinars. Stephanie asks, can you show how to access that forms list with overrides again?
Oh, yes. Let me. Thought I had ClientTrack still open, but I might have closed it.
Oh, Wally looks like shared a screenshot accessing the work groups and then selecting form customizations
That's the
in
one.
global administration. Okay,
Yep.
good. I think we've got an answer to that then.
Thank you, Wally.
Yes, thank you. Wally is also one of our HMIS system administrators as well. So
Teamwork.
yes, teamwork. Okay, so we're almost at time, everyone. So we wanted to let you know if you have any other questions, comments, or suggestions. We would ask that you contact your client success manager so you can find out how to join our community of practice that has been mentioned already. There is a specific channel dedicated to the data standards updates. So if you would like to participate in hearing about other best practices, what other communities are doing to alleviate their problems with data, quality and service provision, then we would ask you to go to the community of practice first, because that will be a great place to learn. So everyone, we would like to thank you for your time and attention. Let's all give a big round of applause, of course, to Jessica and Jesus. We have some helpful links that we'll be sharing here in the slides, and you will be receiving a recording with the slides in the next couple of days. So without further ado, thank you all again, and we will see you in the coming months for the third webinar. Thank you.